Before I start, I want to call the Commission's attention to the fact that I'm not being disrespectful by the way I'm dressed today, and I would deeply like you to notice the graphic on my T-shirt and think of this as a costume for today's history moment. What I want to talk to you about today is the history of the local music business in Gainesville, and as usual, what the Commission has done to produce that. And it's a hard story because it actually, cities are centers of culture, and Gainesville has been producing music since it was created. But in terms of a situation where local musicians can make their living and the music is reliable in the city, that's a story that starts in Gainesville in the 1920s. And it actually starts with Major Thomas of the Thomas Center in two different ways. Major Thomas was one of the people who was a heavy booster for bringing the University of Florida to Gainesville. And when that happened in 1906, he began tirelessly pushing the state to build an auditorium for cultural events on the university campus. And the university auditorium was one of the first arts venues in Gainesville. It was built between 1922 and 1924. And as you guys know, that was done with the help of the city government. And the University of Auditorium was the first place where outside music began to come in. And then secondarily, the Thomas Center was built as a hotel, opened in 1928, and touring musicians came down in the winter with the tourists, and Gainesville began to develop a reliable music scene. The Great Depression put a kink in that, and after World War II, the growth of the local music business in Gainesville was mostly African American. And that's a part of the story of the Cotton Club, which deserves another whole history moment. But the Cotton Club was a building that was at Camp Blanding. It was the PX at Camp Blanding, and it was brought here. And it became a very prominent stop on what was then known as the Chitlin Circuit, which included musicians like James Brown and Bo Diddley and Otis Redding, and many of those musicians visited Gainesville. Now, what it takes, actually, I'm going to give you the punchline of this fast. What it takes to keep a music community viable now is two things. And one of the most important ones, you can probably tell, is venues. Okay. But in the 1950s, Gainesville as a city went dry. Okay. There were no clubs, and the music scene in terms of local music and venues died off. The University Auditorium continued to have visitors, and but in 1963, the City Commission, very wisely, decided that You would no longer have to drive across the county line to get alcohol. And if you wonder where Tom Petty came from, the answer to that is a club called Dubs, which was one of the first music clubs that opened after Prohibition was rescinded in Gainesville. So very quickly after 1963, of course, people had been playing music here all the time, but clubs began to open up, venues began to appear, and Tom Petty became rich and famous. I'm going to get it fast. Okay, the music scene here ebbs and flows. And one of the reasons for that is the Tom Pettys and the Stephen Stills of the world move on. And then the local music scene has to produce some others. That happened in the 1990s in Gainesville. And because of venues, city commission policies, another whole wave headed by Sister Hazel and those of you who went to Wabash, the bands that were there this weekend emerged. They too went off and left the scene. It ebbed again, and now it's on the way back. And what kept it alive in the last ebb was you guys. Free Fridays was, for a long time, the best single exposure that local musicians could get, and especially in the times when it ebbs. Now there's Depot Park, now there's festivals, now there's busking. The local music business thanks you very much because we're on a flow now.